In person and virtually on Zoom. It is a great pleasure for me to welcome you to this hybrid research talk on general factor of personality. We have like 1,000 people in person here. So our resource person for today's session is Professor Dimitri van der Linden. Dimitri is a full professor at the Department of Work and Organizational Psychology at the Erasmus University, Rotterdam. One of his lines of research involves the neuroscience of the peak experience of flow, a state of full task immersion. He also studies other psychological states such as mental fatigue and burnout. He is also engaged in research on individual differences in personality and ability, including the one he will be talking about now, general factor of personality. He's currently an associate editor in several scientific journals, including Personality and Individual Differences, ACTA Psychology, and Frontiers in Psychology. He also serves as adjunct professor of the Faculty of Psychology, Universitas Indonesia in this year, 2023. And for today's session, Dimitri will be talking about his extensive and long-time research on general factor of personality, its current status, and the topics of debate on the concept, including its impact on real-life outcomes. Yeah, without further ado, please welcome Dimitri, and the time is yours now.
Hello. Okay, it's better. Okay, so welcome. Thank you for the introduction. Good to be here and give this talk on the general factor of personality. Yeah? It's one of my larger lines of research. I do different topics, but we already told. But this is one of the things I'm kind of engaged in a lot. And well, the idea is that you have personality research, yeah? And there's a lot of personality research, mostly in an applied context. So we try to see to what personality relates to certain outcomes. But there's also a lot of research actually in personality that search for the basic dimensions. So if you look at personality, how many, because we can differ in many different ways. Eh? There might be thousands of more 10,000s of ways people can differ from each other. But well, we want to kind of bring that back to broader basic dimensions. So that's always a main goal in personality research. Well, and this type of research has led to several well-known models. A bit older, less famous, but maybe you still know it. It's Catel's 16-factor model. It says, well, if you look at personality, we need to distinguish Oh, what happened? Oh, you clicked it. Oh, okay. Do not click. Okay, there it is back in. Okay, so Catel's 16 model. We have Eysenck, Big Tree, very famous, one of the early models that really got off. Of course, we have the hexagon model, which is new. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. And we also have the very well-known 5-factor model, or the Big Five. They're almost the same, slightly different. But okay, these are some of the major models. There are several others. But the idea of each of these models is that they represent the most basic personality factors, right? So that means that, for example, if you have the Big Five, it means that we assume actually that they are the highest independent factors. And that means that, for example, people can have all kinds of patterns. You can be open, you can be conscientious, or a mix of that. But in the population, they should not be related to each other. These are the most fundamental factors. This is the idea of each of these models. And some say it's 3, others say it's 5, etc. For example, if we focus on the Big Five, this is kind of the idea. You can measure the Big Five with all kinds of items. You can ask people, do you like parties? Do you work very hard? And then all these questions cluster in facets, in aspects, and then on top of that, there are this, in this case, the big five. Hello? Okay, so the assumption, this is very important. The assumption is that they are independent. However, when you look at the data, the empirical data, we often find that they are not independent, and actually these factors are actually correlated. And so what we did a couple of years ago, we did a meta-analysis. Well, I'm pretty sure, do you know what a meta-analysis is, right? So then we collected many different studies, and we looked at how the big five intercorrelate. So these are more than 200 studies. And so this is each of a lot of data, but just, do not touch it. A lot of data, but well, the only thing actually you have to look at is these colored numbers. And this is, of course, each pair of the big five. Agreeableness with neuroticism, extroversion with neuroticism, etc. So each of the big five and how they are correlated. So it seems to be that they're not independent. When you look at the meta-analytic data, there are quite some consistent intercorrelations between the big five in this case. And it means that there might be factors, because if things are correlated, there might be something causing that. Might be something causing this correlation. So what they at some point did is that they saw, okay, you have the big five, but on top of that, we have two higher order factors, stability and plasticity. And stability is a mix of openness and extroversion, whereas stability is a mix of conscientiousness, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Yeah, so for example, this is Colin de Jong. He's quite a famous researcher, and he did a lot of work on saying, well, these are actually the highest models, the highest factors. However, when you look again at the data, you see that even those two are still substantially correlated. So that means that there might be indications that there is even a higher order factor, something more general. So what would it mean that there might be something higher? Then we come at the general factor of personality. Well, when I tell that to people for the first time, they're always a bit confused. It's a bit abstract, but in general, it means that. So the big five, they might have, of course, they're different. They're not the same. Openness is not the same as being friendly. Friendly is not the same as being neurotic. Yet, all these different measures seem to have something in common. So they seem to have a common core. And this is what we call the general factor of personality. So this red part that overlaps, you can consider that a kind of a general factor of personality. Well, we did the intercorrelations, we did with the meta-analysis, and then we did several analyses. For example, you can do a direct exploratory effect analysis or confirmatory effect analysis like this. And then you can see that it's actually confirmed that, well, there's quite a strong general factor here. You see these factor loadings. Are you familiar with factor loadings? Most of you students also? I think more or less. Yeah? Did you get that as a course? Okay, well, anyhow, what this shows, never mind the technical details, what it shows is that indeed there's evidence for a general factor. And here you see the average factor loadings of the general factor on each of the big five. Well, I talked about the big five. We also find the general factor in other models like the I-Sync model we just discussed, or the hexagon model. So there are different models and you always can extract the same general factor of personality. Okay, so empirically, there's not so much discussion because this is a very robust finding. Some things in psychology are not very replicable. You cannot find it back after you've done it the first time. But this is very robust. So that this factor exists, is no real question about that. But what is it? In general, the general factor is a mix of social desirable outcomes. So when a person scores high on a general factor, on average, this person is, in terms of the big five, open-minded, relatively hardworking, sociable, friendly, and emotionally stable. So this is kind of, you can put people on a continuum of social desirability. So this is the content, what actually is general factor. But then still, people have a lot of critique or a lot of questions about, okay, so what is it? We have the big five, we measure it, we find it, that's clear. But yeah, some people say, well, you know, it's not really something that reflects personality. It might be a statistical byproduct. Oh, no, do not teach it. A statistical byproduct or a social desirability bias. It's not there, even people say, but that's no longer upholdable, or it's not consistent. So many points of critique have been raised, but yeah, some actually make sense. Let's see some of those critiques. Here you see a discussion we had a couple of years ago. You see me move my hands as I always do, and then like being very enthusiastic talking about the GFP. This is Bill Ravel, Colin de Jong. They don't like it that much. So there was really a fierce discussion on what this general factor might be. And some people say, well, you know, also always when we send the papers to the journals, yeah, you did it like this. You have the exploratory factor analysis, or you did a confirmatory factor analysis, but maybe it's different. And it's always a bit frustrating because the thing is, it doesn't really matter what you do. You can do it with different methods. You can take the average, a weighted average. You can take a factor analysis, but the thing is almost always the outcome is more or less the same. So it's like the general factor of intelligence. It doesn't really matter how you extract it. It's quite robust. And every time you do this, there will be a general factor. Okay, so one other alternative explanation, maybe you already thought of it yourself, is that it might be social desirability, but then as a bias, or as a kind of a self-esteem or something, a response bias. Do you understand how that can lead to a general factor? Does it make sense? Not really? Okay. So what happens if you give a questionnaire to somebody and people fill in their own, you know, personality, and two people are similar. Let's say you and me, we are the same on the big five, exactly the same. Like it's a theoretical exercise. So we are 100% the same. The only thing that we differ is a self-esteem or self-reliance. And so I have to fill in, are you friendly? And on a 7-point scale, I say, yeah, I'm very friendly, 6. And you are just as friendly as me, but you say, but you're a bit more modest. You say, well, I'm a 4. And then if you do that for each of the items, then I would score higher on a general factor than you. Not because I'm better than you or have a different personality, but because I filled in the questions. You know, like, so it seems a very reasonable explanation for this general factor. And in that case, it would not be a real personality factor. It would be kind of a thing, how you measure personalities, like a bias, right? A kind of a... Okay, so yeah, this makes sense. And many people say, well, it might be something like this. And yeah, so confident, if you're very confident, you might fill in it in a different way. Several papers have been published saying, okay, maybe the general factor is indeed social desirability. However, the whole discussion of social desirability is also a bit difficult. What other people also found out is that those things that are assumed to measure social desirability as a bias, for example, fill in a certain questionnaire in a much better way or in a social desirable way, that actually also reflects a lot of true behavior. So it's not only bias, but it's actually something that in the way you behave. So it's not only in the questionnaire, but it's also related to how you act. And it also means that it has outcomes. And so what we think is that there might be some bias, because every time you use a questionnaire, of course there's bias. It's never 100% sure. It's not like a thermometer. It's like a thermometer. But it might be something real. So a bit of a bias, but also something real. And then what might this real thing be? One of the ideas is that it's something like emotional intelligence, or social effectiveness. And what will happen if there is something like social effectiveness or emotional intelligence, what will happen to the scores on the big five? So you have an idea of what emotional intelligence is, more or less, right? Okay, so what happens if somebody's really truly emotional intelligent? Would he be in conflict with other people all of the time? Would he be a very nasty person? No, probably not, because that's almost, by definition, that's not possible, right? So if you have to fill in questions about whether you're agreeable, friendly, it will lift your score. It will make you more friendly. So would you be very neurotic or very stressed all the time? No, because if you're emotional intelligence, it almost seems like a contradiction that you're always like stressed or so that then it would raise your scores on the stability. Would you be very shy or not be able to talk to other people? Would that be? Sorry? No, no. So, I mean, so you see the picture that if you're high on that, it might actually also raise all your scores on each of the big five components. You'll be more sociable, more all kind of social desirable behavior. So in that case, social intelligence or emotional intelligence and the general factor of personality might actually be related to each other. And so that was one of the ideas. And we said, well, then let's test it. So we did another meta-analysis, and this time not only on the personality, but we looked at studies that looked at the relationship between the big five and emotional intelligence. And based on that, we could extract a general factor, and we could see how this general factor related to emotional intelligence. There are two ways to measure emotional intelligence. One is by test, and we saw there a positive correlation of 0.28, which is not extremely high, but on the other hand, I mean, test and abilities, it's a different way of measuring things. But you can also measure it. Many studies on emotional intelligence use emotional intelligence surveys. And you see that the correlation there was 0.88. Well, in social science, in which the measures are always a bit fuzzy, they never have like perfect measures. So a correlation of 0.88 actually means that it's more or less the same. So there was a strong confirmation that all those measures of emotional intelligence are actually quite similar to a general factor of personality. So the reason that there might be a general factor of personality is because people have some social effectiveness, emotional intelligence. This was done with testing the surveys and the measures and see how they correlate, very high correlation. And we said, well, but there are also studies on that looked at the genetic components. So, for example, we know that personality is heritable, emotional intelligence is also heritable. So, can we see whether this correlation of 0.88 or this very strong correlation is also present at the level of the genetics? So we did that with twins. With twins, you can do that. You can test to what extent things are heritable, and also you can look at the genetic correlation. And we found indeed again that the correlation at the genetic level was very high, 0.90, even higher. So what does it mean? It means that there might be some genes related to personality. We don't know exactly which genes these are, but from twins research, we know that there are genes that related to that. And it's very likely that those genes that are related to differences in personality, in this case, the GFP, are the same genes that are responsible for differences in emotional intelligence. So again, it's a very fundamental overlap. It's not only at the measurement of the questionnaire, but also actually at the level of the genes. We also have non-shared correlation 0.50, and these are kind of, you can also look at other things, but let's not focus on that. I think this is already quite interesting and relevant here in this context. If there are any questions in between, just ask. It's always good if you don't understand things or you want to clarify things, then just ask in between. Yeah? The twin study. So what you do is that you have twins, and you have monozygotic twins. You know, twins that are identical to each other, like the same. and you have twins that are non-identical to each other. So they can be girl, boy, but they're just like average brothers and sisters. They're born at the same time, but they're not very special in terms compared to other average brothers and sisters. Whereas the other one, the monozygotic twins, they are 100% genetic. They are genetically identical. So if they are different, then we can say, okay, the difference must be due to environment. And for the dizygotic twins, the regular twins, it might be different. So by comparing those type of twins, you can say, okay, to what extent is a trait heritable? So you can look at the general heritability of a trait, but you can also look at genetic correlations between traits. Yeah. So in this case, it were 360 adult twin pairs, 80 dizygotic and 236 monozygotic. Yeah. Yeah. So this is a standard way of testing it. Nowadays, we also have like this real genetic studies. They actually look at the genes. But before we could do that, these twin studies were a good way of testing these things. Yeah. Okay. Well, of course, we have research on the general factor and in terms of the overlap between with emotional intelligence. Another thing, of course, if you think that it might be something real and not only related to how you fill in questionnaires, you might also expect that it relates to many real life outcomes. And so about 15 years of research we've done now looking at all kind of outcomes related to the GFP. And always based with the idea that that if it's social effectiveness, it might have very specific outcomes on different types of measures. And one thing we did is that, again, you can use the Big Five meta-analysis. And there's been a lot of studies on how the Big Five relate to job performance. Yeah. And so I'm not sure if, for example, the people that are working in applied psychology, do they know the studies of Judge? Judge and Baron, what's the name? Barrett. I think they have a quite famous meta-analysis on the Big Five and job performance. And we can use the data to kind of to calculate how a general factor of personality out of this Big Five would relate to all types of job performance. And so there were many different performance, like you have overall job performance. We can look only at the supervisor ratings. We can look only at objective performance, so not related to how people fill in the questionnaires, training performance. And what you see in general is that, well, the GFP actually seems quite consistently and strongly related to performance, job performance. So that's not something you would expect if the outcome would only be a questionnaire, you know, like the result of filling in questionnaires. So it really relates to outcomes. It really relates to what people do and then how they perform. We had in the paper we had many different measures like OCB. Do you know OCB? Yeah, exactly. So you have your job, and to the extent to which you help other people, or you kind of do extra things for the organization. So, and it also was related to the general factor of personality. So this is, well, I think quite nice research in terms of that it shows that it's really something. This is a bit of technical. I was kind of wondering whether I should explain it, but just give it a try. So what you can do, because of course the GFP is based on the Big Five, right? So then people can say, yeah, but of course the GFP predicts something because it's the Big Five. But you can look at the general component, you look at the component that is shared by all the Big Five, and you can look at the components that are unique for each of the Big Five. Does it make sense? So for example, neuroticism, maybe 50% of that is related to the general factor, which overlaps with the other traits. But neuroticism itself might also have aspects which are not shared with other personality dimensions. And so you can get that up, take that apart. And then you can do a regression, for example. Let's focus on this one, overall job performance. You can do a regression. You put in the general factor, And you say, okay, how much does the general factor explain of job performance? How much variance? In this case, it's 8% approximately. Then in the second step, you can add the unique variance of each of the big five. So that part of the big five that was left over after you take out the general component. And what you see here is that the second step, in total, 10% was explained. That means that there's a 2.5% increase. So the unique aspects of the big five still predict something beyond the GFP, but it seems that this shared component, that actually takes the lion's share of the predictive validity of performance in this case.
So
yeah?
For the 2.4% is the unique of
all the big five. Yeah. So you have the big five unique components. You throw them in one step and then the step in itself explains another 2.5%. Another way to look at it, by not looking at the big five as a whole, but look at each sort of the correlations between the big five and job performance. And then, for example, let's say we know from the literature that conscientiousness is the most consistent personality factor related to job performance. Well, what happens if you kind of correlate conscientiousness with job performance, but you take out your first control for the general factor? So that part, what it has in common with other personality things, and then you see that, well, it's reduced by more than half. It's still in itself, so unique, it still predicts, or no, it not predicts, it correlates, but it's, yeah, the largest share is taken by the general factor. Some things even disappear completely, yes, like what do we have here, like extroversion. Extroversion is the second best predictor, 0.15. When you take out the general factor, there's almost nothing left. There is actually nothing left in. Yeah. So yeah, it's a bit technical, but it's a different way of looking at how the general factor relates to the big five in terms of explaining job performance. Okay, so this is job performance based on the idea that the general factor reflects social effectiveness, emotional intelligence. Of course, one other idea one can have is that it might actually also relate to leadership, because yeah, there's many books on being an effective leader needs social skills, emotional intelligence, and leadership. I mean, many people think and write about how those things might be related. If you're very effective socially, then you can also more easily become a leader or selected as a leader. So yeah, then the obvious step would be to test that, if that's indeed the case. Maybe you already saw it in the meta-analysis. We had some measures of that, but let me highlight it, because this was the study we did, same study I just showed you. But we also had some measures of leadership. So there's several measures. You can say, well, leadership emergence. Do you know what it is? If you have a group of people, you throw them together and you not have an official leader, at some point, somebody will take charge, you know, like automatically, because this person is the most talkative or the smartest or whatever. And so, yeah, leadership emergence. And you see that it correlates 0.49 with the GFP. Effectiveness, when you're a leader, how effective are you? Transformational leadership, it all relates to the general factor. Of course, one of the things, this is nice, again, but one of the things with this type of research is that it's correlational. So we have leaders, and we see how, when leaders stand up, and we see how you can measure their personality, and then see how that correlates, but it doesn't show you the actually direction. But then there was a nice study that was done by one of our Ph.D. students from China. He worked in the Netherlands, he's now finished, but he did a very nice study, because in China, and I think you also have it in Indonesia, sometimes you select student representatives. Yes, so it's like an election. And what he did is he made a fake election. So he let people come in the lab with large groups, and then he had groups of 4 people. And from this 4, let me show it like this. I will in 2 stages. Maybe I can better explain it in this way. So they came in like large groups in a large room, And then they were kind of had to work in groups of 4 people. And they were given 20 minutes to say, okay, one of you has to be the leader or the kind of the campaign, the group. So that this person will be going on to the next round. Before the test, everyone had to fill in questionnaires, and they were also instructed, well, try to be the representative in your own group of 4 people. So each had the same, more or less, goal to say, okay, you have to become the group representative. After 20 minutes, we didn't know what happened there, but we just said, okay, now one person from this group has to be selected, and has to go on to the second round. Then you have 17, because there were 17 groups. He did it 2 times. 70 people that were elected, and those 17 got a few minutes on the stage like this, and they could say, they could prepare it, and then they could say, why should I be elected? Yeah? So, and then people that were left over could vote. They could not vote for the person from their own group, but they could vote for any other person, like the 16 other persons. And then, so one person was selected, but we can also count the number of votes people got. There's 2 rounds. So first, who will be selected here? And the second one, then how many votes did the people get that were in the second round? And then you can test that, of course. And we also had this personality measured at the beginning. And what we found is that when you compared the average GFP score of those that were selected compared to those that were remaining, then there was a significant difference in terms of that those people were actually higher on the GFP. So it seems that indeed people with higher GFP have a higher probability of getting selected in this free discussion where somebody has to be selected. This fits with the idea that it's social, emotional intelligence, because those people probably are more likely to be selected. In the second stage, we could look at the number of votes people got. So here you had these members, and then indeed 2 groups. We saw a very strong correlation actually between the number of votes people received and their GFP scores. This is a correlation. It is also the correlation with the Big 5, but the GFP was actually the highest in this case. So this, it's a good way of studying it, because the other one was only correlational. This is not really causal, but at least it gives you more indication of how the processes of selecting a person went and how the GFP might have played a role in this. Yeah? Yeah? Second step. Yeah? You mean the correlation like this? Yeah. So this is the number of votes people get. So they have 70 people, and we also had 2 groups. So you had 2 times 70 people, and then you take them together and say, okay, how many votes do they get? And then you can correlate that with their scores on the general factor of personality. And the damage of the Big 5. And the Big 5, of course. It's just like you can have different levels. Eh? You can look at the GFP, but you can also look at the Big 5. So it's always hierarchical. You can look at the Big 5, you can look at the facets, you look at the Big 2, look at the general factor, and you can compare how they do. But of course, this is not the unique. This is not what we just talked about, the unique aspects of the Big 5. These are the full Big 5. So what it means is that in this correlation, the GFP is also included, if you know what I mean. So if you would take it out, then maybe it becomes much lower. Okay. Yeah. So it's different with the tweets research. Sorry? It's different with the tweet research. It's different from what I just told you with the job performance. Yeah. That's because there we had look at the unique aspects of the Big 5. This is just the Big 5 as they are measured and compared to the GFP as they are measured. But you have to take into account that always at the lower levels, the higher level is present. It's in there. Okay, thank you. But, yeah. Okay, so the idea about social desirability, the people that had critique on it, I said it might be social desirability. Actually, the idea is that in in how people deal with each other. Social desirability might not be a bias, but it might be kind of a general way people behave, and this might affect their outcomes, many outcomes. And so because it's heritable, we can also say, okay, so what does it mean when something is heritable? That means probably that there's some selection for it. So if you have a certain set of traits, and those traits are heritable, and people like those traits, and it helps you, for example, to reproduce, then it gets it kind of continues itself. And so it's interesting to look at it also from that perspective. And so well, you can have several ideas about that. For example, you might think, we now looked at performance and leadership, but in more general, you think, okay, so if that's the case, if it's social desirability, then you would also expect that people scoring high on that are more popular. And so one study we did a couple of years ago in classmates, high school classmates, and they filled in their own personality, but we also have this network analysis where each of the person in the class says, okay, who is my friend? Who is the person I like? And you can fill in names. And some people are mentioned very often, and some people are mentioned not so often. And so people get a kind of a popularity score. Yeah, popularity score not based on questionnaires, but on how other people in the class judge this person. Okay, so this is quite a rather objective. I mean, it's not objective, of course, it's people filling it in. But I mean, if many people say that a person is popular or that he likes this person, then you can assume that this person is more popular, right? And so we tested it. And indeed, there was a correlation between self-rated personality, you can extract the GFP, and things with likability and popularity. They're not the same, eh? Some people are popular but not really likable. Yeah, so I mean, especially in high school. But I mean, overall, you see that those that seems to be kind of socially effective, know how to deal with other people, they tend also to be more popular. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, this is popularity, and based on that, you can assume that if people are popular, they might also have an advantage. For example, on what we call the mate market. Do you know what the mate market is? Can you have an idea about it? Mate market is the how you are on the market of finding a partner. Like finding a partner that you want to marry with, or you have children with. So I mean, some people kind of call it a market. And well, you can imagine that popularity is part of that. And actually, you also tested this idea, and this is something I really like. We had the data, we didn't collect it ourselves, but we collaborated with a guy from the US who spent a lot of time in Bolivia, and there was a kind of a population there that was indigenous. So they lived in the Amazon. They were very removed for a long time from this kind of what we call civilization. Now they're already kind of they're very modern, but it's a very specific group in Bolivia, and they spend a lot of time there. And they also measured all kind of things, including personality. And so, based on that those type of measures, we could have the big five. We could look at the general factor, and what we found is that because we also knew how much children they had and grandchildren. And actually, there was a positive correlation between the GFP and the number of offspring in males, particularly. So if you're male in this population with a high GFP, it turned out then apparently you're popular, or at least you had a bit more children. Yeah. So there's also it's in the same line actually as though that idea of having being popular, helps you to kind of get along on the mate market. Yeah. Another one, attractiveness. So we also tested that because there are several data sets in which personality has been measured, and also related to ratings of attractiveness. And yeah, we saw that it's not a very strong effect, but most of the time, the relation between attractiveness or objective measures and personality are not so strong. but we nevertheless found an effect. For example, here we had a study we published with 5,000 participants, and we found a correlation of 0.13 between rated attractiveness rated by other people and self-rated personality. In this case, the GFP. Yeah. We also had speed dating data. Are you familiar with the speed dating concept? Yeah, you are. I mean, you know what it is. Okay.
To meet person, and then when the time is up, you meet another person, and then you and then you decide which man is the best.
Yeah, or which you want to see again. So it's like you sit like this maybe, and then each time you kind of the males sit like in the row, and the women go around or the other way around, and you have 5 minutes to talk to each other, and then just about everything, and then there's a call, and you go to the next, and then you have like 20, 30 people, and after each round you have to fill in. Oh, I want to see this person again, no, or a second time, or and so it's a way of finding a mate. And for the research, in this case, they did the speed dating, but they also had questions on personality. Do I like this person? But also how attractive was this person? And then we found in this ratings, there was a correlation of 0.24 between how people rated a person. So there were many different ratings of one person and the general factor of personality. And one of the ideas that all these things seem to be related to each other, like in terms of the biological possible mechanisms, it's not like we know for sure, but one of the ideas is that it might be related to mutation load. So I'm not sure if you still know a little bit about your biology lessons from the high school. So every time when there's reproduction, there's always like this possibility that some minor things can go wrong. Most of the time, it's not really a big effect, but I mean, they can accumulate, like the number of mutations in a person. And if they accumulate, it might have a general kind of effect on many things, like your personality, your attractiveness. So all these indicators like popularity, attractiveness might actually have a kind of a similar underlying reason. That's not the main reason, but it might contribute to it. And actually, there's also some studies that had already looked at it. They looked at actually the number of genes and mutation load, and they found some initial evidence for that there is a relationship again in this area. Okay, the last one here. Okay, quite early, but so. Oh. Okay, what happens here is that do you know the P factor? Did you ever hear of the P factor? For the people in clinical psychology, we have many different psychopathologies. You have like ADHD, you have like, what else do you have? Compulsive things, you have antisocial anxiety. And what they found in this area is as many of those things overlap. And so it's similar to the big five, actually. So it's a similar way of reasoning, similar empirical data, but it's more or less was independent from each other. But then at some point, Caspi, who's one of the big shots in the clinical research, he said, well, there might be kind of what we call a P factor, psychopathology factor, based on all different kinds of psychopathologies. Yeah, here, for example, here we have anxious, somatic complaints, social problems, attention problem, aggressive behavior. They all load, or actually the factor loads all these different traits. And then because it's so similar to the research in GFP, we wanted to know whether those are also actually related to each other. And this actually turned out to be the case. So depending on the studies, the correlations are minus 0.30 to minus 0.65, sometimes even higher actually. So that actually makes sense that because if you have the GFP as a social effectiveness continuum, so if you're on the very high end, those are the people that are very charismatic, very popular, they know how to deal with other people. On the low end, if you're very low, it actually might indicate problems. You know, if you're not able to deal with other people, if you can't communicate with them, you don't know how to deal with them, that often is indicative of more clinical problems. And this actually seems to confirm that a very low score on the GFP seems to sort of partly overlap with psychopathological symptoms. Yeah. So it seems to be that this general factor indeed is very general. So many different things relate to it. So there's still a debate. It's not resolved yet. There's still people saying, well, I don't believe it. It doesn't make sense. Or there's even people say, well, how can you rate people on a general score? There's many different questions or debates that are still going on. But nevertheless, you see, if you look at the data, there are quite some interesting things over there, I would say. So this was not the last one. This is the last one. Again, related to like raising kind of genes and all this stuff. And then we also found a study. We also had a study in which we looked at the child care and the way child, for example, the mother gives parental care. Yeah. And there we had self-reports and also father reports, children reports. There are different types of measures, so not only self-reports. And we found again that compared to the big five, that this GFP was positively related to that. So it's kind of in the same line of having a general advantage in some certain areas. Yeah. This is not the unique. This is the big five as it is, like the last one we had. Yeah. So we published it in Evolution and Human Behavior. Okay, so a lot of information about the general factor of personality. Well, it's there. We know it. It relates to many real-life outcomes. We also know that. But as I said, there are many questions still open. Is it truly a personality trait? Should we consider it like this? Or how should we look at it? There is some research, but it's not clear how it relates to general intelligence. The findings go back and forth a bit. I think there might be something, but it's not clear. And of course, also a question is how broad or how general is it? Because it seems to relate to many different things. And actually, we're now doing some research showing that it is indeed very general. And actually that many of the things that we measure in personality seem to have the same underlying core, which might be good or bad. I'm not sure. It might indicate a measurement problem, but it's nevertheless something that's worth looking at. Okay, so I think it's a lot of information. So hopefully it sticks a little bit, but maybe you also have many questions. Let's see. And yeah, I would say thank you. Any questions?
Okay, any question from the in-person participants? Yeah, silakan.
Hi, Dimitri.
Hi.
I wonder if how really you can measure the GFP? Is it composite from the ocean, the score, or?
Yeah, what you normally do is that you can have a measure of personality, and if you have a broad measure like the Big Five, or you have the Hexaco or the I-Sync dimensions, and then you can do a factor analysis, and you can extract the factor scores. So you have each person just get a score on how this person's relates to all these underlying. It's like you are familiar with the general factor of intelligence.
Yes.
Yeah.
The
Guilford thing. I mean, other people also know it quite well or not? Do you know the general factor of intelligence? So it's the same. You have like, how do you extract it? You take an IQ test, actually measures the general factor, and you give different tests. You get verbal, how well are you with language? How well can you spatial, numerical? So that different tests. And based on the composition of the kind of the overall score on this, you get an IQ score. This kind of reflects your general intelligence. So you can do the same for the Big Five. So you have different tests, like verbal, but now in personality range. And they can say, okay, people can score high or low on that. So there might be specific patterns. There are different ways of getting a high score on the general factor. But the general idea is that they are related. So what it means is that if you look at what does it mean? So let's say we know that a person will come in here, and we know nothing about this person. The only thing we hear about this person is that on a 10-point scale, the person scores 8 or 9 on agreeableness. A very friendly person. And now we have to bet money on how extroverted this person is. And we have to bet either 50% chance whether it's below or under the average. If they would be unrelated and we would all bet, then some of us would win. So, we can't predict because they're uncorrelated. But the general factor of personality says that if we know a person's score on agreeableness, we can bet some money that this person also is extroverted a bit, more than average, and maybe also more than average conscientious or other traits. So it doesn't have to be, but in the population, those things tend to go together. It's same like intelligence. If you know a person is very smart, knows how to calculate, do mathematics very well, it's very likely that this person also is quite smart in language. I mean, still people have patterns. Sometimes, high school students say, I'm very good at math, but not so good at verbal or languages. Yeah, compare relatively, but you still overall, people are high or low on the general thing.
So basically that we can also use like many kind of personality instruments and to have that factor like coding and or the GFP.
Yeah. So the idea is that it doesn't matter which personality model you take. There's thing overlap. So we actually also done some studies with that. So for example, you can extract the GFP from the Big Five, but also the Hexaco or the I-Sync or the Catel. And then when you correlate factors that you extract, they are very strongly correlated. So this is also the same like intelligence. You can have the Wessler intelligence scale, you have the Raven intelligence scale. They are very different tests. But what you get is still more or less, not always 100%, but more or less the same measure. It shows how intelligent a person is. And here it shows how high a person scores on the general factor of personality. So you don't need the Big Five. A lot of studies I showed are with the Big Five, but because that's the most available data. But it doesn't have to be.
Any other questions from the audience? And from online participants, if you have questions, you can raise your hand or write it in the chat box. So we are waiting for questions to come, but maybe I'm trying to understand the GFP, general factor of personality. If this is not really a constellation of Big Five, or is it?
Yeah, it is. So, I mean, it's a constellation of Big Five in terms of that if you score high on the Big Five, then overall you're more open, more conscientious, more friendly. So it has the same if it, like intelligence again, if you can make the comparison. What does it mean if it say you have a high score on intelligence? Then it means that overall you're relatively good in verbal ability, in mathematical ability, spatial ability.
Okay, there is one question from the audience, Nabila Sudako. GFP correlates highly with survey AI, PI. In my understanding, survey AI is also self-report measure, hence it might be prone to response bias as well.
Yes, of course. So yeah, there's a problem there. So what you have in that's a good question. Yes. So emotional intelligence measures often are also done with self-reports. So the reason that they might be so strongly correlated is, of course, part of might be method bias. Because what I said, it's if you have measures in psychology in general, there's always bias. So it's definitely there might be bias, but the thing is, it might be bias and also something else. and they just measure the same. So it's yeah, it doesn't.
But then there is one question from Nabila.
Yeah.
In general, it seems that GFP does not correlate as strongly with other rated or objective measure.
No, and that's, I mean, it's always the case. So that's what you have in any personality or psychological measure. So if you have two questionnaires, they're always more strongly related, almost always, than if you have objective measures. I mean, that's why it's always so difficult to find studies or to do studies with objective outcomes or other ratings, because the correlations are lower, because you have more error management, error variance. You also, it's like so many things that are not, you don't have the bias, but the bias component is away. So that's true, but that's a general finding with any measure of psychology. If you have two ratings that are self-rated, it's always stronger than if you have another rating.
Yeah, but it does maybe relative to other traits,
Yeah.
like conscientiousness,
Yeah.
extraversion. GFP is correlated better.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So for example, each of the models has each measures, like the big five, have the same problems, that they are more strongly related when you have only self-reports. But the GFP, in compared to that, does relatively well. And of course, also the genetic correlation indicates that if it's bias, it might be bias, but at least it's a very fundamental bias. So people have a genetic tendency to fill in this questionnaire in the same way. So it might be, even if the bias, it might actually be a genetic bias.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Question number 2 is raised by Rani Merli.
Oh yeah, the bifactor model. Yeah. Yes. Bifactor. Yeah, that's one of the slides I had. I went to it very quickly, but that people always ask, okay, should we have a hierarchical model, which have the the GFP on top, or you can also have a bifactor model, which is a bit of a different. Can I still get it back?
The slides.
Yeah. So let's go there. Let's see. Yeah, this one. Oh. Okay. Yep. Oh, no. No. Yeah, here, this one. Yeah. Okay, so for example, I had this slide, and actually what you see here, this is a bifactor model, where you have, for example, the items, and the items you can extract the big five, and on the other hand, you also have this part where they have this shared variance. I mean, yeah, you can do it like this. This is a bifactor model. This is the bifactor model. You can also do it in a direct model. You can do it via the big two. There are different ways of doing it. But the idea is that at the end, it doesn't really matter that much. So it's the outcome is always the same, because you have to, you look at the shared variance, and the numbers might be slightly different, but not really, if you understand what I mean. So can we still see the chat then now, or not really? Oh, so okay. So hopefully, yeah. So the answer to that is, yeah, you can use a bifactor model. And sometimes we do that, and sometimes reviewers ask for that. But the outcome is more, it doesn't really matter how you do it. That's actually the same, because Jensen did a lot of research on the general factor of intelligence, and they had the same problems, same discussion, and they also showed that it doesn't really matter. Same. Okay, another question?
Another question.
Creativity.
Yes, JP and creativity.
Yes, funny that you ask, because the same student that did the research on leadership, the Chinese student, after this study, he did 2 or 3 studies, also some meta-analytic data, in which he looked at creativity and the GFP, and actually, yeah, there was quite a strong correlation again. So he's now in the process of trying to publish that. He has 2 studies, 2 manuscripts, that he now tries to publish on this topic. So yeah, indeed, there is a relationship between creativity and GFP. Weird countries. Okay. Yeah, it's funny because I go back to the same guy again. He was very productive. So maybe just make it screen wide or I stop share maybe can also. Oh, share.
Okay, yeah. From Bonar, Tapea, maybe you can.
The cross-cultural thing. So so the meta-analysis we did, what I showed you, it was many studies, 250 studies or so, and most of them were indeed from weird countries, the Western countries, the rich countries, that's etc. Democratic, I don't know what else is there, but there were also studies from different countries like China, Indonesia, maybe Malaysia. I'm sure Malaysia. So there are different data sets in there. But of course, it's also good to check it whether it's the same in very different cultures. And the guy that I talked about did the leadership study and the creativity studies, but he also did a very large meta-analysis with specific Chinese data sets. So only data sets that were kind of collected in China, published in China's Chinese journals. He had also like 150 large data sets, and they found the same general factor there. And of course, we found it in the Tsimane, in Bolivia, the population. So there are many studies indicating that it's quite robust also in terms of culture. Yeah. Okay.
From Mary Sophia.
Yeah. How can we evaluate and redesign items? You don't party in Indonesia?
Party with Arisan.
With what?
Arisan.
Arisan, yeah. But not you don't go wild.
Not the kind of party you have in the Netherlands.
Okay. Yeah, okay. So what happens is, of course, they actually do that. So if you measure like Western do it. So what happens in big five personality or personality measures in general, they sometimes adjust that to the local circumstances. For example, for the Tsimane, that was very specific. And if you look at the literature, the original studies, they had some items they had to reframe because some items really didn't apply at all. Or, like it doesn't make sense in that context. But then they had to change it to get it as closely to the original one that still makes sense. So, for example, parties might not be the thing in Indonesia then, maybe. I'm not sure. I can't imagine actually. You must like parties. No? Okay, but you might have something equivalent to this. So you might have something where you go to and which relies on you interacting with many people and, kind of have to do small talk or meet a lot of people.
We do have a lot of family gathering.
Yeah, Arisan.
Arisan.
Yeah.
Perhaps it is the closest. It is the closest to the party.
Yeah. Although when it's family, it might be a little bit different. Only when it's only family, but when you also have this larger events, right?
You like to have this gathering things.
Yeah.
Talking,
Yeah.
but not in terms of party.
Yeah, but I mean, it's the idea. You can translate party with the words something like Arisan or so, and the idea is the same, that you go somewhere where you have to meet other people that you don't know, and you have to talk to them. How are you doing? I'm fine. It's the situation is the same. The context might be a bit different, but the idea that you have to meet people. Yeah.
We meet the person we know in Arisan.
Yeah, that's why I say maybe the family might not be, or the family meetings might not be the most common thing to do, but you also have, like, for example, the promotions or the promotion, the inaugural speech, the gathering of the inaugural speech.
Okay, inaugural speech.
So then people come together. Yeah.
A birthday party.
Perhaps.
Yeah, Dia Natalis.
Yeah. So there might be things where you kind of meet with a local, so not only the family, but or in the neighbor. For example, I was when I was in Indonesia a long time ago, I lived in the neighborhood, and then sometimes they had these meetings. I don't know, meetings because they've celebrated something, and then we went there. I was brought along, and then you meet people. I mean, other people might be familiar with them, but it's like a party, yeah? A bit. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so going back, yeah. So what often happens is that these measures, if they are correct, they kind of already try to adjust the big five measures for local things to make it applicable. Yeah. Okay. What's it? Did we discuss this? Non-communal?
That's how we describe Indonesia.
The what?
Cantik.
And what is it? What kind of ceremony or what kind of gathering is this?
Cantik is like you sit with other your friends in the cafe.
Oh yeah.
And then a little snack.
Yeah.
Coffee.
Yeah. Yeah, but maybe that's also a social event, eh? Yeah, and some people like that really much. Hang out, yeah. 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 Okay.
So,
Other questions?
Other questions from the audience? Yes.
Hello, Professor. So from your presentation, you explained a lot from GFP that uses the Big Five, Mexico, and other personality measures. And me and my friends just talked about this yesterday, discussing about Myers-Briggs, race inventory, the MBTI, the 16 personalities, and the critics for MBTI is it's not used much in research because
there's no evidence for it.
There's no real evidence. So I just want to know your opinions about, can we use MBTIs in research, like when we do something?
I would not use the MBTI. I would not recommend using it in research because other people are very skeptical about it. So it depends on what you want. If you want to kind of test the validity again or something, but if you use it just as a measure of personality to relate it to other things, then it might not be the obvious measure to take. So, and if, for example, if you want to publish it, you know, like, or, but yeah, unless you want to do it to show that it has limitations or that it has validity or not, so then it's of course logical that you take the questionnaire. But if you want to use it just as a measure of personality, then I would take the other more established ones. Having said that, I can imagine that the thing is that if you measure traits, it doesn't actually measure how you measure them. Probably what you get from, if you extract a general factor from that, I would bet that the thing that you extract from that might actually be very strongly related to the general factor of personality. Because it's, you know, there are many items, and well, people have a lot of discussion about the factor structure. You have all these 16 factors. Do they make sense? But if you kind of forget that, it just gives a lot of information on, do you like parties? Do you like, you know, the questions are the same at the end, more or less. And so if you throw them all together, you extract the general factor, then you still have the GFP problem. Yeah. Did you use it? Did you use the scale?
We just use it, and then because he just tested using MBTS, and he was not very happy with the results.
Oh yeah, the factor structure.
I'm very happy with my results. So
with the MBTI also. Also with the MBTI, with the same questionnaire.
Yeah, we use the same.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
The same website. It's called 16 Personalities.
Yeah.
I think for me personally, I think the 16 personality is only good for, if the context is to know yourself, not really for the real life practice.
Yeah, but the thing is that what they say is that well, the factor structure is not strongly supported. So then, and if you want to know something about yourself, I mean, the advantage of it is that it has some appeal. if you know what I mean. So it's something that people like. That the way it's kind of the factors are built, it appeals to people. And but it's not, and that's probably why it's so popular, also in companies, organizations, and they still use it a lot, I think, in organizations. But in science, people are very skeptical. I'm a bit in the middle. I mean, it probably, yeah, the factors might not be really, supported. But on the other hand, I mean, there's a lot of discussion on 5. Some people say, well, 5 doesn't make sense. So there's also, it doesn't really matter that much. But for science, or if you want to publish it, yeah, it might be a limitation.
Oh.
Okay.
Okay, there is still a question. Still a question from Nabila Sudarko. Sorry, I'd like to confirm.
Yeah. Actually, that's a thing that might be, that's actually not the first time people asked it, and that might be the way you frame it. So I use social desirability, yeah? And but there are different ways of looking at social desirability. So you can have social desirability as true behavior. So a person can be social desirable. That means that so this person is polite, knows how to deal with other people, and you have people that are not social desirable, that are very rude, for example, or unpolite, so it can refer to actual behavior. But in the literature, you also have something like social desirability bias. And that doesn't refer to behavior, but it refers to how people fill in a questionnaire. Yeah. And so it's good to distinguish this two, because people can fill in a questionnaire in a social desirable way, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're also actually social desirable. Does it make sense? So for example, if you say, if you have a questionnaire and are you very friendly? Are you very conscientious? Can people rely on you? A social desirability bias means that person gives a high score, but it's not how this person behaves. And then it's a bias. It's a social desirability bias. And so we think that part of the GFP is social desirability is actual behavior. So not only as bias, but also actually the way people behave. And that's, of course, related to social effectiveness, because if you're social desirable, then you're also most of the time a bit more effective. So does that answer your question, Nabila?
Yeah, Nabila.
It's always difficult.
Maybe, social desirability, but is this your own term of social desirability bias? I mean, GFP is equals to social desirability bias. Is it some critics of your GFP concept, or is it from your understanding of this?
Yeah, so the idea that the GFP only might be social desirability bias is only how people fill in the questionnaire. It's one of the points of critique that other people have on the GFP. And so in that case, actually the GFP only is measurement error. It doesn't reflect how I am or you are as a person. It reflects how you fill in the questionnaire. That's one of the points of critique. And we say, no, it might not only be bias, but it might actually reflect how you really behave. So if you fill in, I'm very friendly, I always am on time, I work hard, I'm very stable, then it's not only how you fill it in, but it's actually how you are. Does it make sense?
Yeah, and about social effectiveness.
Yeah.
So you equal social effectiveness with GFP and also emotional intelligence. Because, but yeah, maybe this is a
confusion. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I can imagine that it's confusing, and maybe it's not so good, because it's actually they reflect the different names for more or less the same type of behavior. It's not entirely the same, but the idea is that if people are emotional intelligence, that overlaps with being socially effective, eh? Because if you're emotionally intelligent, you know how to deal with other people.
That is overlapping. But
That's overlapping.
with a social
Yeah.
desirability.
And then the thing is, most of the time, not always, but it also relates to being social desirable. So if you know how to behave in a certain situation, most of the, on average, that also means that people are socially desirable. So they have traits that allow them to talk to other people, or to become a leader, or to do something that people say, well, we kind of admire that. This is something that's a good trait. Yeah. So if you are if people can rely on you, if you're working hard, if you are emotionally stable, if you are friendly, those are all
Adherence to social norms.
yes, of course, you you do that, but it's still it's effective. So I mean, if you say, well, I'm friendly because I know how to behave, like Indonesia, they're very polite, so they do all kind of things. Of course, these are social norms, but some people do that better than others.
Yeah.
And so we can say, well, when people score higher on that, they know they either are like this or they know how to do that. But at least the thing is that overall we say, well, this is a very polite person. I think you even have a name for it, right? Is it Adat? Adat? Adat. Is it Adat? Like it being,
Yes.
how to, yeah. So being high on Adat,
That is,
might, yeah. Adat? Adap. Oh, Adap, okay. Yeah. Yeah. But so this might be actually a word for a cultural specific thing that might actually relate to. So the idea is we have actually studies on that how you behave in terms of the higher GFP might also partly relate to the culture. So different cultures have different things that they think polite or are, and so if people are high on the GFP, they are more tuned to what to do. So it's a social effectiveness. So, for example, in the Netherlands, being polite might overlap a lot, but it might be slightly different than here. So, but if you're high on that, you can at some point you can learn that better, or you can pick it up, and you know better how to do this kind of small things that make people say, well, this is a very social desirable person.
Ya, itu kan yang social norm.
Yeah.
Pancasilanis.
How is it called? Pancasila?
Pancasila, you know Pancasila?
Yeah, I've also, because I think also other people sometimes mention that in relation to something like this.
Really?
So it's also like, it's the same, like, it's also like politeness, or what is it? Yeah, politeness. Maybe that was the better word I'm searching for, not the other one. What's the difference with the words?
It's our national philosophy.
Yeah. National
Philosophy.
Our
consists of 5
conduct.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Principle.
The nice thing is that, because the whole idea that how the Big Five came to be was based on, of course, lexical approach. And it means that if something is important, then it becomes very salient in the language. And so the fact that you have a kind of whole, labels for it and a whole culture and an idea about it, probably it indicates that you kind of put a very strong emphasis on this. We also have, of course, words for politeness, but not so extensive, not so many different variations probably, and not so well kind of established than here.
Can you say also that if person have a high score in GFP, that it will
Yeah.
With a person with a high score in GFP, it will also like comply and conform with any environment, like in the working conditions or any other.
Yeah, so there's actually there's also a whole I didn't want to go into that because it's a bit complicated, but there's a whole, of course, more fundamental philosophical discussion of when is something personality and when is it not. And for example, I always use the case Ted Bundy. You know Ted Bundy? Ted Bundy? No? Yeah? The killer. Yeah. So he was a killer. He was a kind of you know, like very bad. But also in terms of his behavior, he was like, he was like many things he had. He was. So if he had to fill in a Big Five questionnaire, he probably would score relatively high. So, but he was not lying. He doesn't even have to lie. So, for example, would you like to go to parties? Maybe he was like the guy that went to parties. Would people? Do you find it easy to talk to other people? Well, probably he scored very high. Do you work hard? Can people rely on you? Yeah, I think he did because he was a lawyer or something. He's quite. Yeah, he went to law school. Yeah, so he did. He was a very hard worker. So on many of the items, he doesn't even have to lie. Maybe if he says, "Are you very friendly?" If they directly ask him, and he would say yes. But again, so most of the time he was very friendly. He was very polite to people, and so he probably might have scored high on the GFP. So, but and what is it? What does it reflect? Yeah. So he might be overall. You might say he was socially effective for a large part.
Yeah, and in terms of measures that we used to measure this GFP, are we still using available measures of Big Five personality or FFM?
Yeah, nowadays we still do that. I mean, most of the time because you probably can make a questionnaire of specifically for the GFP, but then it would probably be a mix of items from the Big Five. And so you can do that. But you can shorten maybe but there already are very short measures of the Big Five. So you have like the shortest version I know is 10 items.
10 items.
Yeah, you have the TP, the 10 item international 10 item personality inventory. TP. Yeah. Very 10 items. But it's very
for 5 grades?
two for each grade. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and of course then it's less reliable, so that you see that it kind of moves more than like the sides. But yes, it's used in the literature a lot, I think. And you have 30 items. The Big Five inventory is 44. The Neo is 265. So based on the GFP, if you want to know only the GFP, you can just use 30 items, for example, and you have a really good measure. But it's the same with intelligence. You always need a mix of things. So, for example, you cannot only measure. You have actually the Raven. Do you know the Raven test? The Raven intelligence test? Okay. Yes, yeah. So that's one item. That's one test that actually was designed to measure mainly the general factor of intelligence. So you might have to be something similar for the GFP, but overall, it's better if you have a large variety of traits that you measure. And then you can just use the Big Five short form. Just okay. It's good.
Okay. Do we still have questions from the audience? In person, both in person and online? No? All right. If we don't have questions anymore, thank you very much, Dimitri, for the really new revelation of general factor. Oh, okay.
Just end. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming, for both in person and for online audience. And thank you very much, Dimitri. And Dimitri's now in the last day of
Yes.
your
visit here. Yeah.
Dimitri is
So go
going
back.
back to the Netherlands.
Yeah. This evening, actually. Yeah.
Thank you so much. But of course, we can still in contact with Dimitri.
Yes.
Even if he is already in the Netherlands.
Yes.
Thank you so much, and have a good day to all. And see you again next time.
Yes. Thank you.